The first time I heard someone breathing inside my house, I was standing in the kitchen with every door locked, every window closed, and my phone showing that the security alarm had never been triggered. My name is Adam, and this happened 18 months ago when I was living alone in a small rented house at the edge of town. The property stood at the end of a quiet residential road, with an empty field behind the garden and only one neighboring house close enough to see from my bedroom window. It was not an isolated cabin or an abandoned building, and that was one of the reasons I felt safe there. People walked their dogs past the house during the day, delivery vans came and went, and the streetlights stayed on until sunrise. The night it began, heavy rain had been falling since late afternoon, and by midnight the wind was pushing branches against the upstairs windows with a soft scratching sound. I had finished work late, eaten dinner in front of the television, and checked every lock before going upstairs because I had developed that habit after someone tried car doors along the street a few weeks earlier. At around 1 a.m, I woke because I could hear movement downstairs. It was not the sudden crash of something falling or the random creaking old houses make when the temperature changes. It sounded like a person shifting their weight slowly across the kitchen floor, pausing after every step as though they were trying to work out which floorboards made noise. I stayed in bed and listened while the rain tapped against the glass. My breathing became shallow because I did not want whoever was downstairs to hear me, even though part of my mind kept insisting there had to be a harmless explanation. Then I heard the kitchen tap turn on. Water ran for several seconds before stopping. I reached for my phone, opened the security application, and checked every sensor. The front door was locked, the back door was locked, and no window had opened. The small camera facing the hallway showed nothing except the bottom of the staircase and the weak blue light from the alarm panel. I called the police quietly and told the operator that I believed someone was inside the house. She instructed me to lock my bedroom door and remain on the line while officers were sent to my address. While I waited, I heard footsteps moving from the kitchen into the hallway. They were slow and careful. When the person reached the bottom of the stairs, the footsteps stopped. For almost a minute, there was complete silence. Then someone breathed out. It was a long, controlled exhale, and it sounded close enough that I could picture them standing with one hand resting on the banister, listening for any movement above. The police arrived within 7 minutes. I saw blue light flicker across my ceiling before hearing the front door open and several officers enter the house. They searched every room, cupboard, wardrobe, and storage space, but they found nobody. There were no wet footprints, no forced locks, and no signs that anyone had entered. One officer suggested that the sound of the tap and footsteps might have traveled through the pipes from a neighboring property, although the closest house was separated from mine by a driveway and a brick wall. Another officer checked the loft and found nothing unusual. I was embarrassed, but one detail prevented me from dismissing the entire experience. The kitchen tap was wet. There was a fresh glass of water beside the sink. It was not mine. The officers photographed it and took the glass away, although they warned me that finding usable fingerprints would be unlikely because I had probably touched it before. I had not. For several days, nothing else happened. I replaced the locks, added another camera in the kitchen, and convinced myself that someone must have entered earlier while I was distracted and hidden until after I went to bed. That explanation frightened me, but it still made more sense than anything else. A week later, I returned home from work and noticed that the bedroom curtains were open. I always kept them closed. Nothing had been stolen, and the security cameras showed no one entering. The footage remained clear throughout the day, except for a 12-minute period between 2:06 and 2:18 in the afternoon, when every camera displayed a frozen image. At exactly 2:07, my electricity usage had increased sharply. Someone had switched on the kettle. The next morning, I contacted the landlord and insisted that he inspect the entire property. He arrived with a maintenance worker named Colin, a quiet man in his 50s who had apparently carried out repairs at the house for years. Colin checked the windows, locks, roof access, and alarm wiring before telling me there was no obvious way for anyone to enter unnoticed. He spoke calmly and seemed more interested than concerned while I explained the sounds, the glass of water, and the frozen camera footage. Before leaving, he asked whether I usually slept with my bedroom door locked. I said I had started doing so. He nodded and replied that it was probably sensible until I felt comfortable again. Something about the question bothered me later because I had never mentioned locking my bedroom door. 2 nights after the inspection, I heard the breathing again. This time it came from inside the bedroom. I woke without moving and stared into the darkness while trying to control the sound of my own breath. The room looked empty, but the curtains were moving slightly even though the window was closed. Then the mattress shifted near my feet. Someone was beneath the bed. I did not scream or jump up because I knew that any sudden movement would tell them I was awake. I reached slowly toward my phone, but before I could touch it, a calm male voice spoke from the darkness below me.
You should keep pretending to sleep.
The voice was quiet and steady, without anger or panic. I stopped moving. He continued speaking in the same, almost polite tone and told me that if I remained still, nothing needed to happen. He said he was not there to steal from me and that he had already been inside the house many times without causing trouble. I could hear fabric dragging softly against the carpet as he moved beneath the bed. Then he asked why I had replaced the kitchen camera. I realized he knew exactly where every camera was positioned. I waited until I heard movement toward the bedroom door, then rolled from the bed, ran to the window, and climbed onto the small porch roof below. I dropped into the garden badly enough to injure my ankle, but I kept moving until I reached the neighbor's house. Police surrounded my home within minutes. Again, they found nobody. This time, however, they discovered something they had missed during the first search. Behind the fitted wardrobe in the spare room was a narrow access panel leading into a sealed service cavity between the walls. The space connected to the loft, the kitchen pipework, and an old crawl space beneath the floor. Inside, officers found water bottles, food wrappers, disposable gloves, a sleeping bag, and dozens of photographs. Most of the photographs showed me. Some had been taken through windows, but many had clearly been taken inside the house while I was asleep. In several pictures, the camera was close enough to the bed that the photographer's shadow appeared across my face. The police initially suspected Colin because he knew the layout of the property and had access to old keys. They arrested him 2 days later, and during questioning he admitted that he had discovered the service cavity years earlier. That was the first twist. The second was that Colin insisted he had never used it. He said the landlord had asked him to seal the access after a previous tenant complained about hearing noises inside the walls. According to property records, that tenant had disappeared 4 years before I moved in. The police searched the landlord's office and discovered rental files containing photographs, work schedules, emergency contacts, and copies of identification belonging to every person who had lived in the house during the previous 12 years. 3 former tenants were listed as missing. The landlord disappeared before officers could question him. They found his car at an airport car park, but there was no evidence that he had boarded a flight. The house was sealed, and I moved in with my sister while the investigation continued. I believe the danger had ended because police had taken every photograph, removed the hidden bedding, and placed cameras around the entire property. 6 months later, the detective in charge called me and asked whether I had ever owned a small black alarm clock. I told him I had not. He explained that officers had found one hidden inside the wall cavity during a second search. It contained a memory card with hundreds of audio recordings made inside the bedrooms of different tenants. The final recording had been created 3 days after the house was sealed by police. In it, someone moved slowly through the empty property, opened my old bedroom door, and stood beside the bed for nearly 20 minutes without speaking. Just before the recording ended, the man whispered one sentence.
He still thinks I needed the house to find him.
I changed my name, moved to another part of the country, and stopped using social media after that. Only my family and the detective knew my new address. Last month, I received an envelope with no stamp and no return address. Inside was a photograph of me sleeping in my new bedroom. On the back, someone had written, "You locked the doors much earlier now."